Well, God bless you. Thank you so much for joining us on this Tuesday. Again, for the Spirit-led broadcast, we come to you every Tuesday from our studios here in the Austin, Texas region at 1 p.m. Central Time. And we're so honored today to have our friend and wonderful man of God, Apostle Mark Pfeifer. Mark, with his wife, Nikki, they're founders and senior pastors of Open Door Church in Chillicothe, Ohio. They're also the founders of the Soma Family Ministries. It's an apostolic network that they lead of churches and ministries. And they also have the Soma Network of Schools, which is a 2-year ministerial training center that's not only conducted here in America, but also abroad. And besides writing the curriculum for these schools, Mark is the author of 12 books, including a book that I love called Apostles Then and Now, and a 21st century movement that he wrote with John P. Kelly. And together, Mark and his wife, Nikki, serve as the convener of the United States Coalition of Apostolic Leaders, or known as ICAL. So thanks so much, Mark, for being with us today.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's always a joy.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yes, yes. So you've been really busy, and I know that you're doing a great work for God. And if those of you that want to know more about ICAL, and I'll post this again towards the end of our broadcast today, but you can go to www.uscal.us if you want to know a little bit more information about ICAL. And again, I will post some information on that towards the end of today's broadcast. But, well, Mark, I know you're coming through a busy time. You've had some roundtables. You got some more roundtables coming up, and I think you just did Alabama, if I remember correctly.
That's right. We were just in Montgomery, Alabama, with Kyle Searcy at his church. That actually, at this point, he is transitioning into his son's leadership, which is pretty exciting time for them. And it's just a great roundtable. We were in Hinesville, Georgia. We were in Phoenix, Alabama earlier at the end of last year, actually, and 2 here in Ohio, where I live. We did that to try to work out some kinks and find some best practices when doing these.
So was that Phoenix, Alabama, or Phoenix, Arizona?
Phoenix, Alabama.
Okay.
I didn't even know there was a Phoenix, Alabama. Yeah, there's a river that is the border between Georgia and Alabama, and Columbus, Georgia is on one side of the river when you cross the river, but it's the same metroplex. It's Phoenix, Alabama. So yeah, okay. But it's not spelled like Phoenix, Arizona. They spell it differently, but that's where we were technically, and we had that round table there.
Very cool. Very cool. That's great. That's great. Well, today I'd like to just talk about something that I know you are, it's a heartbeat for yours, and you've talked about this a lot already on different ICAL videos that you've posted and even written about it. But I want to talk a little bit just about how God is moving in this hour in relation to networks, and I would call them kingdom networks, because the focus, of course, is that there's safety and accountability. And, so maybe you can just kind of kick us off here and talk a little bit about that difference in what God is doing in networks, as opposed to perhaps what we've experienced or what we've been used to, which, quite frankly, I don't think has worked very effectively for the past maybe 10, 15 years, that networks have sprung up all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's wow. It's so in flux, and it's so changing at this point. It's hard to speak exactly to what's going on, because it's like a river. You never enter into the same waters ever a second time. But to answer that question, really, I think we'd go back into the 20th century, mid 20th century, that the last half of the 20th century belonged to the independent churches. Okay. They just exploded and thrived. And that was an incredible move of God, but yet it presented a problem. And that problem was a lack of accountability. That's number one. The second thing that's really tough is succession. So I just talked about Kyle Searcy and his son succeeding him now in pastoring the church. But that is a very difficult challenge in independent churches when the founding pastor is in their later years, perhaps passed away. And that succession is very, very difficult. Now, I don't know that denominations do it much better. It's just that they have typically a larger body of ministers to choose from when finding another pastor. Well, at the end of the 20th century, with all of these independent churches, as there was an emergence of prophets and apostles. Now, not to say that there weren't prophets and apostles going back 2,000 years. It's just that we maybe didn't recognize them as much as we did towards the end of the 20th century when it entered more of the mainstream. And when that happened, then it seems that the apostle began to understand perhaps part of their function is to gather these churches together and create what we define as networks. So apostolic networks became something of commonplace going into the 21st century. However, I think that things are changing, John, and they're changing because of this problem that many apostles had no other organizational models to follow except for their old denominations.
Yeah.
And so what happened was that many of these apostolic networks just morphed into many denominations with a hierarchical pyramid, someone sitting at the top making the rules, and everybody else supporting that organization and that hierarchy with their tithes and their human resources and whatever. Well, because of that, then there's a lot of people who are just as hurt from apostolic networks as we might find people hurt from denominations. And so what I find now is that there's a younger generation coming of age that are probably in their 30s, maybe approaching 40 years old, that grew up in the independent kind of apostolic prophetic movement, who are not too keen on being a part of apostolic networks or being affiliated with apostolic leaders because they've seen the control and they've experienced maybe firsthand the hurt that comes from that kind of control manipulation that seems to be just almost innate with that religious spirit. And it creeps in. It creeps in unaware. So,
Mark, it's so amazing you say that. And of course, I've described it a lot in talking about denominationalism and a lot of what I grew up with and what I've observed even amongst some apostolic networks where, they touted to be different, but the pyramid I talk about is still there. I think it was Bill Johnson that once said that organizations, denominations tend to be really, really great at building one powerful leader or a couple, whereas family is about raising up everybody step into their destinies. And I'd spent a short period of time connected with a network, and I'll just leave it at that. And one of my disappointments was just it wasn't relational. It was just, even though they really drew a lot of people from denominational, especially charismatic and Word of Faith and maybe Pentecostal. And their leader was a very, very powerful, renowned prophet of God, apostle of God, that I've read his books and really was influenced by him. But, it just wasn't relational. And I remember even at one time I was at a table just having lunch with some of the leaders. And I'd expressed that, we would love to connect more and maybe serve some. And one of them spoke up and said, well, you haven't been here 10 years yet. It was 10 years before I ever did anything. So you got to go, like 10 years. Wow.
Right.
And I stepped away feeling disappointed because again, it was like this, got to climb this ladder and do, and people are tired of that. No, I've even found people that just, they're not interested in joining someone's network and paying all their expensive dues because they're so incredible, with no relational connection. And it's just, you expect to show up to their events they have every now and then. Come show up on the pew and we'll pat you on the back for being there. And I know that might seem a bit, harsh. I don't mean it to sound that way, but it's just refreshing when you have leaders and a network that is truly a net. And I know that you tell the story about how when the San Francisco Bridge was being built, how they had lost, people to it and figured, for every $1 million they spent building the bridge, they lost one person. So they were figuring they're going to spend about $30 million. They're expecting to lose 30 people. But then they put those nets under there. And I know about the nets because they're still there. The nets are still in place.
Oh, okay.
They left them there because of people that would climb on the bridge and try to commit suicide. But I guess during that project, they didn't lose anybody. I think only one person fell. Is that correct? I don't want to tell the story.
It might have been 3 or just a minute number of people even fell, which means we work better and actually safer when there's a safety net.
Amen.
So I want to go back to what you were saying about apostolic networks, and organizations are only as good as the people that lead them, as good or as bad. They are as deep or as shallow as the people they lead them. And I think that many of the people that led some of the initial apostolic networks, these great pioneers, didn't quite know how to be relational. I think a lot of them are incredibly anointed, gifted preachers, but it's a different skill set altogether that once the service is over and you're sitting in a restaurant with someone or in a hotel room or a lobby with someone, actually building relationship or talking to them, or even this building relationship, because John, relationships need built. They don't happen automatically, and they don't happen in a church service. They don't happen in a prayer line. No. They don't happen because I'm writing you a check. Relationships happen because people have conversations. In fact, I read a book once that defined relationships as a series of conversations.
So good.
And I didn't know if I even agreed with that. So I had to sit and think about that. And I thought about it for several days. And I came to the conclusion, I think that's exactly right. That what is a relationship other than we just have a series of different conversations. And then through those conversations, you get to know someone, you get to know their feelings, their perspectives, and you either raft with them or you don't. Sometimes you need to not be in connection with some people, but
right. And to kind of just tag on that, we do what's called house fires, which is just meeting in homes or a coffee shop or an office somewhere or wherever. But the concept is you can get a group of people together and you can even sing songs. But until you have conversation, you don't find anything about anybody. And so we learn to devise the small group to ask questions that would just get people to talk.
That's so good. Let them tell their story.
Exactly.
Yeah, when you hear someone's story, you feel like you've lived life with them a little bit.
Yeah. And, that's one thing you've done very well with our relationship is, given both Jennifer and I time to share with you our heart, and also you share your heart. And that's just, it's powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the purpose of organizations, and I just did a video, before we came on the broadcast, I was actually editing it a little bit at the end. That's why I asked for 5 more minutes before we started, about relationships. When we hear people say, well, the church is an organism, but not an organization. And I understand what people are trying to say when they say that, but that's wrong. Organizations are important to organisms like a grape arbor is important to the grapevine. Or for people who are hillbillies like me, the tomato stake is important to the tomato vine. Okay, there needs to be a stable, organized kind of entity in place as a structure to accommodate the living organism, which is this relationship that we're trying to define between people. And there's a symbiosis. Both are blessed. Both are given purpose.
Amen. And an amazing correlation to that would be Ezekiel and the Valley of Dry Bones.
Yes.
How, God could have brought life and breathed over that valley, but instead he restored the structure of allowing bones to come together, because I don't care how much muscle you have and sinew and, life, without that structure of the bone structure in our body, we just be a blob on the ground.
Yes. So we don't want to be just organizational. We want to be relational, but the good news is we can be both, and it does take both. Now, where it gets turned upside down is this: whenever the relationships are manipulated for the purpose of just preserving the organization. Like, we exist to preserve our organization. Now that's upside down, because actually the organization exists to preserve the relationships.
Yes.
And now that can get topsy-turvy if we're not careful. But if we keep it in mind what an organization's purpose and function is for, then we are able to enjoy having good organizations, strong organizations, while at the same time enjoying our relationships within them. This is why I like ICAL and USCAL. It's different than the church I pastor. The church I pastor is what we call more vertical, which means that there is order and government in a local church. And I have the apostolic network that Nikki and I lead, SOMA. These pastors have come and said, please, we want to be accountable to you as a spiritual father and as an apostolic figure. I don't demand that. I have no right to demand anyone submit to me. It is absolutely voluntary. 100% of submission lies in the responsibility of the person to come and submit and say, I want to hold myself accountable to you. So if pastors have done that, then I'm to be receptive and to try to cover them. And that's how I wash their feet. That's how I serve them, is by being that figure in their life.
And you just made me really think about something, and why is accountability so important? And I think with the life of Samson, Samson had a certain set of vows, and his vows was the secret to his power. But Samson wasn't accountable. He wasn't accountable to his parents. He didn't have friends that could come to him and challenge him and say, Samson, you have a vow. Why are you in a vineyard? Why are you touching honey from a lion?
Right.
And so accountability is such a beautiful blessing. But going back to the concept of having structure along with life, about 5 years ago, I decided to kind of take a hard turn, because just trying to figure out the network thing. And I was working with a small network called Spirit-Led Family, which is mostly people that was looking to step away from religious order concepts into more kingdom and apostolic prophetic. But I come to a point to where, people would fill out an application, so the $250 that we were asking for that year, and then sit back and just wait for something magic to happen. And it just seems so clinical and so dry. And so I kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater, decided we're just going to be purely relational. And for 2.5 years, that's all we did. But I discovered that without structure, without that formalized agreement on relationship, whether it's just simple mentorship or a father-son type of situation, without that formality and that agreement to say, this is what we're doing, this is how long we're going to do it, let's try this, it fell apart. So I'm trying to find back to that center again, where, yes, we need to be relational. It needs to be about caring for one another and other people's destinies and visions. But then also there's a synergy of why God causes a gathering of eagles, or the greater, the synergy, which of course is just the concept of synergy is, like horses. You can take one horse and it runs at a certain, 35 miles an hour. If you take 5 and you yoke them together, they can run up to 55, 60 miles an hour because of the synergy of having more together. And that's where it goes back that, we don't need to be alone in this hour. And a lot of times with apostles and prophets, especially, they tend to be lone rangers because, like you said, disappointed by religion, and even disappointed because they try to connect with some network somewhere, expecting something and didn't get it. And so now they're kind of just out there, just doing their own thing. And it's not that they can't survive, but they won't thrive because there's a synergy in coming together.
Yes. And those are great stories and great illustrations for great truths. Some of the things that I'm thinking about is when we have accountability, I think that we need to understand that there's different types of accountability. We can break them down into 3, I think, most comfortably. We have fathers. I'm going to use the masculine pronouns here, if you don't mind. Fathers, brothers, sons. You're accountable to your father, but in a different way, you're accountable to your brothers, your teammates. But then there's a different way how you are accountable to your sons. Like our children could hold me accountable, and they hold me accountable when I say, yeah, we're going to go somewhere. And 4:00 rolls around. They're like, Dad, you said we were going to, okay, like they're holding me accountable to my word. But that's a different accountability than the accountability that I give to my spiritual father, John Kelly, to speak into my life, which is a different accountability than I have with people who are my brothers in our team. And this would include you. Like how you and I relate to one another as peers or team members is quite different maybe than how we would relate to a spiritual father or even to spiritual children. Now, usually I illustrate that with a brick, and every brick on a wall is in relationship to 2 bricks above it, 2 bricks beside it, and 2 bricks beneath it, and call this 360-degree accountability. And it's good for us to have people in our life that we come under. We give them authority to lead us as spiritual fathers and mothers. But it's also good to have teammates, people we walk with, people we run with. And then it's good for us to have people that we're pulling up, that we're trying to parent. And all of that accountability is different and it's unique. And, I don't know, today's the time that we should delve into that, but it would be good if we did sometime. I mean, go into specifically how are those 3 levels different?
Well, what I'd like to kind of point out there is, in the scriptures, you had Paul, Barnabas, and Timothy. Paul was a spiritual father to many sons and daughters. Mm-hmm. Barnabas was a brother to Paul, not naturally, but they worked together side by side as apostles, traveled together for a season. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, Timothy was Paul's son in the gospel that he named as a son and honored him, and Timothy honored Paul. And, I think that these relationships are important because, it goes back to just spiritual fathering. I found, especially with people that suddenly come to me out of nowhere, and I don't know if they heard a message I preached or maybe God sent them, I don't know, but they're like, I want you to be my spiritual father. And I used to jump on that only to end up shipwrecked sometimes because you don't know where that motive relationship came from. So I found to say, that's awesome, man. If that's what God wants, I'm down. Let's be friends. Let's just walk this out. Yeah. Let me get to know you. You get to know me. There's no pressure. Because I've had situations where maybe I had someone who wanted to be a spiritual son to me, and they were all about it, and then their wife just didn't feel it. And I have them come to me, and they're like, what do I call you, Dad now, or Papa? Or I'm like, just John. You don't have to follow your husband's footsteps. We can be friends. It's fine. There's no requirement for that. And it's okay. Don't feel guilty. And usually it's because maybe there's some hurt there that she just didn't really want that relationship because she got burned somewhere. And so I found just when you walk it out as a friend, and then when that relationship of father-son really comes into focus to where they trust you and it's there, then it can blossom. But I've had so many, oh my goodness, just people that it just ended in disaster because, they didn't understand what it meant to be a son. I really didn't understand what a father really meant, and then here we're getting thrown together and it's like, ah.
Yeah. And in our culture, it's an interesting phenomenon because we have an increasing number of people who are hungry for parentage, fatherhood, because they had none. But simultaneously, because they had none, they carry with them an orphan spirit. And the deepest desire is for them to want to connect with a father, but that orphan spirit actually keeps them aloof and separated and on the periphery. And they never really learn how to graft in. And I think that we know that we are relationally and covenantally connected to a father when they have to correct us. And I know this gets into a very touchy subject because many people, John, have been abused. They've been spiritually abused by abusive spiritual leaders. There is no question that's the case, and there's no excuse for that. However, if there's a counterfeit, that's a testimony there's a genuine somewhere. And the genuine kind of correction is one that a father gives a son for 100% benefit of the son. 100% benefit of the son. And it reminds me of a childhood friend that I had named Brian. And he had one day a brother, and his brother was named Billy. And I said, Brian, Billy's your brother? Yeah, he's my brother. And I'm like, well, where did he come from? And though I didn't understand it, he explained to me that he came through an adoption agency. He was a foster child. So Billy was a foster child. Brian was a son. So the day came when I think it was Christmas, and they both got into trouble and they were going to be punished. Brian took his punishment, but Billy said, no, I want to go back. And I remember going to their house after that, and I said, well, Brian, where's Billy? And he said, oh, he went back. And trying to wrap my brain around the concept of how you don't have a brother, and then one day you do, and then after you have him, he just disappears. It was years before I really was able to navigate that space. But yet I think that's a perfect illustration between sons and orphans. And won't stick around to accept even the best correction, even the purest hearted correction, which we need, all of us need from time to time.
That is so beautiful. And boy, I tell you, these types of broadcasts, I look up and we're almost out of time. We got 3 minutes, but let's plan to do this again, Mark. And I'd love to dive a little more into this, but let me just kind of wrap up with this, and maybe you can give some closing thoughts. But me coming from a denomination where there was some spiritual abuse, and I'm sure it's in every group. It's just people. Humans are humans, no matter where you're at. But because I was with this denomination, I was more aware of a lot of the abuses that might taken place. That when I would connect with people that came from these settings that were wounded, that if I didn't first take the time to develop that relationship with them and just show them pure love, love with no agenda, to serve them with no strings attached, and just it's like little motto I picked up for what we do: loving well, serving well, and stewarding what God's given to us. But if I don't take that time to have that relationship, just have coffee, sit down and talk, and let them talk and share, to where I finally sense the drawbridge of their spirit lower, to where they're trusting me, then I could bring a word of correction, or then they'll receive. Otherwise, without the relationship, it's always used as abuse. And they're gone.
That's right. That's right. It only breeds rebellion. Rules without relationship breeds rebellion. So I guess in closing, what I appreciate about USCAL and ICAL, and I've been a part of that for over 20 years, is that we're not a covering agency, and we know it. So that's not our thing. We don't want vertical relationships. They're horizontal. It is a collection of brothers and sisters. Peter Wagner used a phrase that's often used in academia, a professional society. So maybe that doesn't ring well, professional, but it's describing a group of people who are equal. And we come together on this platform called USCAL and ICAL for the purpose of connecting relationally, building safety nets across the United States, mutually encouraging one another. And I'll be perfectly absolute 100% honest with you, John. The last 20 years, I have dozens of relationships that are valuable to me, that if it wasn't for ICAL, I would have never met these people. And I get very sentimental at this age in my life when I think about the value of something like USCAL to connect us together. And honestly, you and I would not have known one another if it wasn't for John Kelly and ICAL and et cetera. So I'm very thankful for you, very thankful for USCAL, and thankful for the people that are watching this too. And I hope this has been encouraging.
Well, thank you so much. And yes, I am also very thankful to be connected to ICAL. I know I've not had a close connection just because of distance, and we hope to change that here in 24. And we feel just very honored to be connected with you and to continue what the relationship and friendship we had with John Kelly, wonderful, father in the gospel that was just so kind to Jennifer and I. And so thanks so much. And we will plan on talking again, Mark, and we'll pick up where we left off. But God bless you, and greet Nikki for us. And thanks for your time.
All right. God bless you. Bye-bye.
We hope you've enjoyed today's broadcast and were blessed by our kingdom discussion. We would love to find out more about what your destiny is and where God has assigned you in his kingdom, so we can walk alongside you and see God do great things through your ministry and through your kingdom assignment. Please reach out to us if we can serve you in any way. And thank you again for joining us on this Kingdom Discussion with Spirit-Led Broadcast.